Scott expedition takes its name from Captain Robert Falcon Scott, one of the most eminent and iconic explorers of the Edwardian golden age of exploration. Scott led 2 expeditions to Antarctica, the second of which was the ill-fated Terra Nova expedition. Scott and his team left England in June 1910 aboard a 3-masted wooden sailing ship called the Terra Nova. The expedition had a number of significant scientific and geographical objectives, but these groundbreaking studies would ultimately be eclipsed by the team's attempt to be the first to reach the South Pole. After months of preparation that included laying food and storage depots, led a team of 5 men to reach the pole on foot. They arrived at 90 degrees south on the 17th of January 1912, only to find they'd been beaten to it by the Norwegian explorer Roald Amundsen and his team who were travelling using dog sleds. Amundsen had arrived at the pole 4 weeks earlier. Scott's party turned for home, struggling through some of the most extreme weather conditions ever recorded in the region. Their progress was painfully slow, and each day took its toll on the team members. Frostbite, illness and injuries were magnified by strong winds, low temperatures and by the harsh terrain of Antarctica. By the 20th of March, Scott, Wilson and Bowers, the only 3 survivors, were just 11 miles from their largest depot of food and fuel, but a fierce blizzard prevented any advance. Their supplies soon ran out completely, and they perished, exhausted and probably hypothermic, in their tent. Scott's last diary entry was made on the 29th of March 1912 and ended with the words, "Outside the door of our tent, it remains a scene of whirling drift. I do not think we can hope for any better things now. We shall stick it out to the end, but we are getting weaker, of course, and the end cannot be far."
Shackleton was bound for the Antarctic once again. The Quest steered a southerly course with her crew of restless spirits. The stated aim was the circumnavigation of the Antarctic continent. But Shackleton and Wild reminisced and hatched grand schemes of someday hunting for pirate treasure. As the ship neared her destination, Shackleton grew pensive, recalling the adventures of his younger days.
Anxiety has been probing deeply into me. Ah, me. The years that have gone, since in the pride of young manhood I first went forth to the fight. I grow old and tired, but must always lead on.
The sighting of South Georgia conjured glimpses of past glories. Going ashore, Shackleton celebrated this homecoming with the whalers of Grytviken. In the glow of sunset, he rejoined the ship, swaying at anchor in the harbor.
I find a difficulty in settling down to write. A wonderful evening. In the darkening twilight, I saw a lone star hover, gem-like, above the bay.
Later, Dr. Macklin was called to his side. The ailing Shackleton had always laughed off his friend's warnings about hard times and high living.
You're always wanting me to give up things. What is it I ought to give up now?
Moments later, his heart failed, and he died in Macklin's arms. Shackleton was 47.
This is Frank Knight. May I introduce our co-editors for this edition of the Longines Chronoscope? Larry Lasser, CBS News correspondent, and Kenneth Crawford, National Affairs Editor of Newsweek magazine. Our very distinguished guest for this evening is Admiral Richard E. Byrd.
The North Pole used to be a no-man's land, but these are the days when, by buying a ticket on a commercial airliner, you can fly across the North Pole and drink a cocktail at the same time. Only 70 or more years ago, about 35 years ago, Our guest tonight found out whether there was any land north of the North American continent. He made that first discovery flight, and I must say that Admiral Byrd, our guest tonight, is not only our greatest living explorer, but he's been an inspiration to countless Americans. Admiral Byrd, you've been to both the North Pole and the South Pole. Is there any unexplored land left on this Earth that might appeal to adventurous young Americans?
Yes, there is. And not up around the North Pole, because it's getting crowded up there now, because they find out it's really usable, not only to live in, but militarily. But strangely enough, there's left in the world today an area as big as the United States that's never been seen by a human being. And that's beyond the pole, on the other side of the South Pole, from Middle America. And I think it's quite astonishing that there should be an area as big as that unexplored.
This is a tremendous
So
challenge.
there's a lot of adventure left down at the bottom of the world.
Admiral, do you hope to see that?
I do.
Well, Admiral,
Yeah.
would you say that since you've been to both the extremities of Earth, are these expeditions to such far-off places, are they getting easier because of modern techniques, or is danger still close at hand?
Well, it's a little risky, but nothing like it used to be with the old slow planes and the small cruising radius where we had to put down bases. We replaced the dog teams, and of course that was a big improvement. But now the planes go much faster and they are safer, and they have a much bigger cruising radius. You haven't got the danger of a terribly heavy load.
Admiral, an expedition to which I believe you're the advisor is now en route. What is that expedition doing?
Well, that's the icebreaker Atka, and it's a reconnaissance expedition. It's going down to the South Pole area to make certain observations and to look for some bases. They will be back in April, and they will report back, and upon the information we get from that undertaking, we will base the bigger expedition that's to follow.
Is that very definitely planned, or is that...
That is being planned right now. So I'm willing to say to you that there will be a number of expeditions that will follow, I think, year after year, at the bottom of the world, because the government has really become interested.
Well, Admiral Byrd, I can understand, I think everybody can, the interest in the North Pole because it's so near our greatest challenger, Soviet Russia, but why this interest in the bottom of the world? Nobody living down there, is there?
No, it's pretty cold. There's only one permanent resident, that's the emperor penguin. The little ones live further north. I tell you one reason they're interested. It's by far the most valuable, important place left in the world for science. That's why the scientific groups all over the nation are really interested. But more important than that, it has to do with the future of the nation, those to come after us, or even during your lifetime, because it happens to be an untouched reservoir of natural resources. And you know, as the world shrinks with an ever-increasing acceleration, far-flung places, once useless, like we thought the North Pole was, and no man's land, become very useful. The bottom of the world will be important, not only to us, but to our allies.
I was going to ask you, does it have military importance?
It has some, and as the world shrinks, it will continue to shrink with an ever-increasing acceleration, thus bringing these places closer. And in the future, I can see a time when it will be very, very important strategically.
Well, has the development of air power increased the strategic importance of places like the
very much
Parma
so.
Peninsula, was it?
Very much so. Even now, if anything happened and we lost the Panama Canal, we would have to control the islands just north of Antarctica, which are part of Antarctica, then between there and Cape Horn.
I've heard it said that there are 7 continents in the world, and one of them has never been seen by a woman, and that's Antarctica. Is that actually true?
Well, if the Parma Peninsula is an island, as far as I know, that's true. No woman's ever stepped foot upon the Antarctic continent, and it's the most peaceful place in the world.
Well, I'm sure that won't last very long. I understand that now that you're working with the Arnold Bread Company in charge of frozen foods. Now, is there any future for frozen foods down these frozen extremities?
Well, I think the human race can be helped by that. This was thought out by Dean Arnold, who's, in my opinion, a great humanitarian. He learned that we went down there after 4 or 5 years and finished a meal that we had left there on the table when we had evacuated Little America. Everything was perfect, including the bread. So he got the idea of this frozen bread, and already he sent some to Europe, and it worked very well over there for some of the starving people. So you can store it down in the Antarctic and against the lean years, and you wouldn't have any people in the world really starving if you did that.
Yes, in the event of an atomic war...
You stay there forever.
Admiral, you speak of the resources of Antarctica. What are they? What are the natural resources there?
Well, we've found enough of coal within 180 miles of the South Pole in a great ridge of mountains. It's not covered with snow, enough to supply the whole world for quite a while.
Well,
that's the coal. Now, there's evidence of many other minerals. We are pretty sure there's oil. Now, that coal shows the bottom of the world. Now, by far the coldest spot in the world. Where that coal is gets 100 below zero in the winter.
Well,
it was once tropical. So we think there's oil there, and there's evidence, probably uranium there.
is it any secret, is there uranium there? That would be the only thing that would be practical to actually go after, I suppose. Everything else would be economically unfeasible, wouldn't it?
Well, as we recklessly expend our resources, the time will come when we'll have to go after that stuff down there. Well, you know, I avoided what you said about uranium. I'm not sure about that. I don't want to have the world fighting over the Antarctic.
And Robert, is there a competition among other nations to try to get information about Antarctica and possibly to secure some of these resources?
Well, yes. There are now 7 nations very much interested. Russia is interested tremendously. That I'm sure of. Australia has an expedition down there. The Argentine, the Chile, New Zealand, Britain, and so on. Now, you can understand those people down there being interested because they live down there, the New Zealanders, the Argentinians, the Chileans, and Australians. And so we don't do much about claiming anything.
Admiral, you make this sound a little crowded. Are there that many expeditions now there or en route there?
Well, you know, as I said, it's the most peaceful place in the world, but I don't think it will be for long because of this intense interest on the part of other nations and this nation.
Well, Admiral Byrd, are private expeditions a thing of the past? Is expedition and exploration, making expedition and exploration now purely a government function because of the tremendous cost
and organization? No, I don't think so. I think down south it may be more or less a thing of the past, but not other expeditions that go there. A lot of them go north now.
This latest expedition now on the way is a government expedition, I take it.
Yes, that's the government.
But may I ask you, is there a great difference between the top of the world and the bottom of the world?
There is. Now, the North Pole is the center of an ocean 10,000 feet deep. The South Pole, the center of a plateau, 10,000 feet high. The North Polar Sea is surrounded by continents slightly frozen. The Antarctic continent is surrounded by a belt of ice, frozen seas of at least 1,200 miles thick. Now, the south is a plateau. It gets, in some places, 14,000 feet up. I've been over areas about 13,000, and it's a little bit chilly up there. So there's that big difference between the top and bottom of the world. The North really isn't very cold up there on the Arctic Ocean.
Not compared to the South. Admiral Byrd, we often hear it said that our young Americans now aren't as hardy as their forefathers. Do you think that Americans do measure up to the standards, the physical standards and morale standards of the past?
I do. I don't believe that. I think they're just as hardy.
Well, what would you say was the most valuable factor on expedition? Is it morale or physical courage, or is it It's your equipment.
Well, I've always thought that loyalty was by far the most important trait. The British told me that when I first went down in 28, that I couldn't possibly get through the winter night without a mutiny if I took more than 20 men. But to serve science, I had to take 42 men. And then I took 56 the next time, and so on. And I did find that loyalty was the most important thing during the winter night when it's very hard on your nerves. I think that's best trait.
Well, that's a very valuable characteristic at any time. Well, thank you very much, Admiral Byrd. It's been a great pleasure to have you here tonight.
It's a pleasure to be with you.
The opinions expressed on the Longines Chronoscope were those of the speakers. The editorial board for this edition of the Longines Chronoscope was Larry Lasser and Kenneth Crawford. Our distinguished guest was Admiral Richard E. Byrd.
Britain's Henry Worsley died on the brink of history, attempting to do something that no one else had done before, to cross the Antarctic alone and unaided. It's an epic feat that the famed explorer Ernest Shackleton left unfinished a century ago. Before leaving, Worsley talked about the risks he faced.
I won't have somebody to ask whether we should stop, how are you feeling, should we go on, should we take a break. Everything will be up to me, and I think that black and whiteness of the decision-making will be very apparent from the outset.
Documenting every step online, the former Army officer covered nearly 1,500 kilometres on foot, braving severe cold and winds, dragging a sled behind him. 71 days into his solo trip and less than 50 kilometres from the finish line, a weakened Worsley decided he could not go on, posting this audio on his website.
My journey is at an end. I have run out of time, physical endurance, and a simple, sheer inability to slide one ski in front of the other to cover the distance required to reach my goal. My summit was just out of reach.
Suffering from exhaustion and severe dehydration, Worsley called for help and was airlifted to a hospital in Chile. But his wife said that on Sunday he died from complete organ failure. Worsley had the backing of Britain's royal family. Prince Harry even trekked to the South Pole with a veterans group in 2013. Prince William said that he and his brother were saddened by the news, saying in a statement, quote, "Henry Worsley was a man who showed great courage and determination, and we are incredibly proud to be associated with him. We have lost a friend, but he will remain a source of inspiration to us all."
The Antarctic terrorist, Jarl Anderhoy. Tromsø, Oslo, Norway. The Dagbladet. Polar explorer and television celebrity Jarl Anderhoy, 38, sits in the dock, the Nord-Troms District Court, accused of having carried out his third voyage south of the 60th parallel in Antarctica without permission from the Norwegian authorities. He is also accused of having sailed without insurance, so the provisions of the Antarctic Treaty requires. The expedition took place a year ago, where, among others, comedian Anne Cat Hareland, 43, and rock guitarist Peter Barley, 50, was on the journey. The voyage constitutes television program Berserk in Pioneer Waters, which premieres on TV Norge tonight. There's an advanced sentence. Anderhoy believes the charges against him are baseless. He points out that the sailboat is registered in Russia and claims to have acquired permission from the Argentine authorities before the expedition. He never sought permission in Norway because he believes an application by him will never be merited by the Norwegian authorities. He felt prejudged by the Polar Institute of Foreign Affairs. Ever since 2011, I have been treated as terrorist in Antarctica by the Foreign Ministry and the Norwegian Polar Institute. They've stolen equipment, withheld information, and tried to stop my expeditions, says Anderhoy. He believes everything started 5 years ago when he went on an expedition aboard Antarctic yacht Berserk with a crew of 4. The aim was to celebrate the 100-year anniversary of Roald Amundsen's trip to the South Pole. The expedition ended dramatically when the sailboat disappeared during a storm in the Ross Sea. Andahoy was even on land along with 18-year-old Samuel Massey at the time. Comrades Robert PCP, who is 34, Tom Gizel Bellica, 36, and South African Leonard J. Banks, 32, were never found. Powerful accusations. Andahoy was fined 25,000 kroners after the expedition. He endorsed this writ. In 2012, he returned to Antarctica to find out what had happened to his friends. Again, Andahoy was fined for having traveled to Antarctica without licenses and insurance. Foreign Affairs and the Norwegian Polar Institute have opposed and tried to stop me. They still do. The entire input on this matter was that I had permission to sail, something I had said, Andahoy said, adding, "It will be exciting to see where they are now. This is a tragedy for me and other relatives who have lost shipmates and sons in Antarctica. The essential question is if there was an accident that was just swept under the carpet. Unreasonable. Foreign Ministry rejects accusations of the Arctic explorer. Andahoy's claims fall on absurdity. Beyond this, we do not want from the ministry's side to comment on an ongoing trial," says Pressevakt at UD Astrid Sail to Dagbladet, the newspaper. The head of section at the Norwegian Polar Institute, Birgit Njastad, testified in the criminal case against Andahoy. She says she told Dagbladet that she did not want to comment beyond what was said in court. Written in Spanish. The documents showing Andahoy alleged authorization of Argentine authorities for permission to conduct the voyage was sent over to the prosecutor late Tuesday night. The papers were written in Spanish. For the examination, the reason is Andahoy complained that the dismissal was a violation of protection zone determination. The Berserk believed they died unnecessarily and would like to shed further light on the circumstances of the accident. He believes, therefore, that these matters have not been resolved. 3 crew members, Robert and 32, Tom, 34, and Leonard, 36, Antarctica on the Bezelschmitter and Horseshoe Bay, McMurdo Sound. Samuel and Massey were back from the pole before the Berserker disappeared. Andahoy got a text from the crew that read, "Everything is good, atmosphere is good in Horseshoe Bay. Contact us." And the Wellington notified the Berserk about the storm expected soon. Expedition participant Manuel Hernandez has gone through these documents today. Prosecutors reject Andahoy's written permission. It is not issued by authorities who handle Antarctica regulations, say prosecutors Trude Vonley in this procedure. Risking jail time. Anne Kat Hjerland was summoned as a witness in Nordtrom's district court Wednesday. "I know that it was working to try to get a permit. I know that there was no Norwegian license, but I also know that Jarl would not have received any permit in Norway if he asked for it," says Hjerland. The prosecutor asked today about the 30-day suspended sentence and fined 45,000 kroners for Jarl Andahoy. "I do not wonder if I will be convicted. I am going to appeal all the way. I do not give up," says Andahoy. The verdict will be pronounced in about a week. So they're calling him a terrorist for going to the Antarctic. Jarl Andahoy was eventually acquitted. I think that this is only the correct one. I guess he's saying this is the only correct decision, or he agrees with it. Unusual attorney Lars' assessment of the events is not a police matter, says the ASBN or ABSN. The director of the shipping department confirms it received a case. It's unusual that police would be sending a case like this to us, also a special case. We previously decided to investigate this. Now we'll reconsider this. This information for us to choose. These accidents basically happen and we perform an investigation. We prioritize the safety on board vessels, particularly the HGV. We do not prioritize accidents of pleasure craft in the same way. They published last week. Inset, the day before the Berserk disappeared, Andahoy got a text message from the crew which read, "There is a good atmosphere and all is well. We leave Horseshoe Bay. Contact us when you can." Want answers. Jarl Andahoy wants to know what exactly happened before the Berserk wrecked. Unanswered questions. The New Zealand naval vessel MS Wellington had notified Berserk about the storm that was expected soon. It has emerged as a mystery for Andahoy that boat chose to leave a safer anchorage point in the announced storm, and he wanted to know what happened prior to this. Now Andahoy wants answers. Troms and Finnmark, the public prosecutor, has forwarded the case to the Accident Investigation Board with instructions to assess whether there are grounds for further examinations. The reason that as Andahoy complained that a dismissal of violation of protection zone determination occurred when the Berserk went to Horseshoe Bay. Andahoy believes action was solely due to necessity. Its purpose of the complaint was to shed light on the circumstances prior to the accident. There are things in here in this matter that are still not resolved, and documentation that we still have not obtained, but that exists. All parties will benefit from that there are no secret issues prior to the event, says Andahoy's lawyer, or Nils Jorgen Vardal, told Dagbladet. Unusual circumstances. Attorney Lars Faust's assessment meant that further investigation of the events is not a police matter, and that the cause, therefore, was sent to AIDN. The attorneys are very pleased that the police have a complaint, says Vorval. Director Morten Kven in AIBN Shipping Department confirms that it has received the case. It is a bit unusual that the police are sending a case like this to us. It is also a special case. We have previously taken a decision not to investigate. We shall now consider this again, but there must be new information for us to choose to do it, says Kvime. Accidents of this type are basically not a priority of the Accident Investigation Board, the AIB. That we should prioritize the safety on board vessels, particularly HGV. We tend not to prioritize accidents with pleasure craft, says Kvime, which states that a full decision will be published in the next few weeks. To stop TV series. The same week, more precisely on January 19th, it is planned to have a premiere of TV Norg's Berserk series. It was today the press viewing where the media got to see episode 1, half the episode 8 and episode 9. The last episode is an epilogue, and more documentary than the rest of the series. Here we see how the one before the crew parted in Antarctica took place, and it repeated calls about the risks of the mission. Several of the families wanted to stop the series. Today wrote VG that the mother of Tom Gizzle Bellica and parents of Charles Banks has chosen to summon TV Norge for the series. A temporary injunction was filed yesterday to stop the series. But hopefully their stance may be changed under certain conditions. There is the documentation for this. We believe, however, that we are on safe legal ground, says TV Norge boss Harold Strom Dagbladet. The documentation in question is a declaration from the dead that they may agree that it displays images from the expedition.
New Zealand Scott Base is here, and this is where the new sanctuary is going to be. A massive 1.55 million square kilometres of the Ross Sea. It's known as the last ocean, mostly untouched by pollution, overfishing and invasive species. New Zealand and the United States first pushed for the divisive proposal, which big fishing nations like China, Russia, Japan, Chile and Norway originally opposed. Now, after years of wrangling, it's finally a done deal. And to show just what a big deal this is, here's political reporter Andrea Vance with more details and more reaction.
Antarctica's Ross Sea, the world's last true wilderness. And it's going to stay that way, protected as the world's largest marine sanctuary.
Children will learn about today. It's a truly historic moment.
It's a massive step forward, a huge win.
New Zealand and the United States led the fight, a fight that's lasted 6 years, with tough negotiations between 24 countries plus the European Union.
I've always had a view that it would be a miracle to get 25 countries to agree.
The Ross Sea is home to dolphins, whales and penguins. It's also the main fishery for Antarctic toothfish, an expensive delicacy that fishing nations like Russia wanted to stay on the menu.
There could not have been a worse time to be trying to do a deal, particularly with Russia.
Crunch talks on the sanctuary took place between US Secretary of State John Kerry and Russia's Sergei Lavrov last month. But the negotiations came right down to the wire, with China only coming on board in the last 24 hours. From December next year, more than 1.5 million square kilometres of these pristine waters will be off limits to fishing.
There's a catch, and the catch is that the protection is time limited.
Yes, marine sanctuary status will be reviewed after 35 years. But it's still significant, and the story's gone global because this is the first time countries have reached a deal on a sanctuary in international waters.
I think that having set a good precedent here, we'll get some other agreements in place quite quickly, but we shouldn't expect all of this to be plain sailing. It certainly won't be.
It's historic because what we believe is it's the start of the protection of the high seas.
And next year, 3 more Antarctic sanctuaries will be up for negotiation. Andrea Vance, One News.
You'll see a travel announcement from us shortly about the Secretary's upcoming travel. He will leave on Monday, the 7th of November. His first stop will be Antarctica, where he will have a chance to visit with scientists and researchers, both at McMurdo Station as well as the South Pole. He'll be the first Secretary of State and the most senior U.S. government official to ever travel to Antarctica, and he'll be there from the 10th to the 12th of November.
Just saying, you can't just fly from Washington to Antarctica.
No, you can't.
Right.
That's impossible.
Right.
Can't be
so
done.
He's leaving.
So
he's going to Christchurch, or is he
yes,
going someplace
we'll be stopping
else?
in Christchurch, but really the first stop in Christchurch will just be to follow on.
Gotcha.
We'll go back to Christchurch for bilateral meetings.
And then what? Okay, so he's going there. What's he gonna? What's the purpose of going?
Of Christchurch?
No, Antarctica.
Yeah. So it's a chance to really see firsthand what's going on with climate change research.
Climate change and ice.
Of course, yeah. Extremely difficult, if not impossible,
And then
to travel down there.
So do you know, has he voted?
I understand that he has voted.
In Massachusetts.
I'm assuming it's still his home state. I can check on that, but I know that he has voted.
Is he physically going to go from the Edmondson station to the actual spot of the South Pole? Are you
yes.
aware of
So it's you go to Christchurch. It's about a 5-hour flight to McMurdo. We'll spend the night there because of just the time it takes to get there and acclimatizing, and then we'll get up the next morning, and it's about a 3-hour flight from there to the pole. There's an actual research facility at the pole.
So he'll go outside and go to that marker for the South Pole.
I'm assuming so. I don't know, but the research, as I understand it, the research facility itself is just a few hundred meters from the actual pole.
Yes, so you still have to go outside to get there, though.
Yeah, I'm assuming you have to go outside to get there. Okay. But the research facility is right there, so we will be on the South Pole.
Do you know if the Foreign Minister of New Zealand is going to be going with him, or
he will not be?
So there's no real technically diplomatic component to the trip.
The purpose for the South Pole is to talk to researchers and scientists, largely about climate change research.
Can we go to Syria?
Can I just ask what specifically does he hope to achieve with this visit, and how much is it going to cost U.S. taxpayers for him to go look around?
I will see if we can get you an estimate. I don't have that, but I think, you know, any basic understanding or attempt to understand climate change, you have to understand what's going on both in the Arctic and the Antarctic, especially with melting glaciers and ice and the sea level rise that can come from that. And as an individual who has literally championed climate change research and awareness for decades now, the Secretary is and will remain committed to increasing the awareness and education of the public about this. And he himself feels it's important, particularly in the wake of us entering into force now in the Paris Agreement, and in advance of the COP22 discussions, which will all be about implementing that agreement, that it's important for him to see firsthand what we're learning about the environment down there on the South Pole, and what information we can then glean from the research to make better, smarter policy decisions. Because that, in the end, as you've heard the Secretary talk about, that's really the answer here, is energy policy. And he believes it's important to go down there and see that for himself.
Because there's some criticism that, you know, this trip is basically, you know, the Secretary wants to knock Antarctica off his bucket list, and he's doing it sort of on taxpayer.
Where's the criticism coming from? I haven't seen that. Have you?
I'll send you some. Yeah, I mean, it's.
I don't know how there could be criticism of this when we haven't even announced the trip. But
the criticism obviously came in the last 10 minutes.
It must have come in the last 5 minutes. But nevertheless, Nick, you've traveled with the Secretary. I think you know how packed his schedule is, and he wouldn't be making this trip, or any other trip for that matter, if he didn't think it was important to advancing issues that are important to our national security and our foreign policy. And climate change is, and it's not just the State Department that said that, the Pentagon has said it's a national security imperative. And that was a study 2-3 years ago. So given all the stakes for the planet, particularly for sea level rise, but by melting ice, the Secretary believes this is an important trip to make, and it's a place that he's been wanting to go for a while now. It is largely weather dependent, and that has restricted somewhat our ability to be able to get down there. Plus, you want to get down there when, you know, there's research going on that is you know, the most relevant to what we're trying to learn, and this is a good time to go.
My friends, these people are so out of touch with science that they believe rising sea levels don't matter, because in their view, the extra water is just going to spill out over the sides of a flat Earth. They're wrong, obviously.